Chapter 1361. This longsword wasn't his martial soul, but it had also been named the Weeping Blood Sword by him. He had commissioned a Saint blacksmith to forge the sword for him, and it had been constructed from soul-refined alloys. He carried the sword with him at all times, and even though it wasn't his martial soul, he had already forged a spiritual connection with them. Following that clash with Tang Wulin's enormous hammer, he was truly petrified that his precious sword could have been damaged. What was even more worrisome for him was that he hadn't managed to get very far away from Tang Wulin, and the reason for that was very simple. The Vajra bracelet was too heavy. After being diverted to the side, the hammer in Tang Wulin's right hand slammed onto the ground, and the entire sports stadium trembled violently. From afar, the spectators could only see how massive the hammer was by comparing it to Tang Wulin, but only after it actually struck the ground did the spectators truly realize exactly what Chu Tianj was currently facing. The giant hammer slammed into the ground, and a deafening boom rang as a giant crater was smashed into the competition platform. On the rostrum, the smug expression on Dai Tianling's face had been completely replaced by astonishment. NC had also been rooted to his chair. What the hell was that thing? Was it really a weapon that could be used by a human? Wasn't that a mecha weapon? Scratch that. Even a mecha wouldn't be able to wield such heavy weapons. Never did Dai Tianling think that Tang Wulin would bring out a pair of weapons beyond the devouring ability of the Vajra bracelet. Meanwhile, the smiling Douluo was chortling with glee. Haha, it's our Tang Sex Disorder splitting wind hammer technique. Indeed, Tang Wulin was currently unleashing the Tang Sex Disorder splitting wind hammer technique. This technique was meant for forging, but it could often be used in battle to great effect as well. The most fearsome thing about this technique was that the power of each hammer blow would be compounded by borrowing the impact of the previous hammer blow. I'm not sure. Only Kaienqiu Dongfang's most trusted subordinates know the answer to that question. However, I trust that everything you saw was real. As for the extent of their collusion and their joint objective, that's beyond me. Of course, on the surface, the Holy Spirit cult has nothing to do with the Spirit Pagoda. Over in the Federation, the Spirit Pagoda has been heavily impacted by the recent controversy. In contrast, the Tang sect is gaining a lot of support, and your performance during this trial of 5 gods is further contributing to that trend. Tang Wulin nodded before asking, do you know what the situation is like with the federal military? When are they planning to deploy their troops? With the enormous strength brought to him by his Golden Dragon King bloodline and body sect congenital secret method, the disorder-splitting wind hammer technique that he was unleashing was truly formidable. Chu Tianj had practiced swordsmanship all his life and had reached an extremely high degree of mastery in the way of the sword, but in the face of Tang Wulin's hammer blows, he found himself unable to use any of his advantages. Tang Wulin was too strong and too fast. There was no way for him to use his sword intent to affect Tang Wulin. If this were a battle without restrictions, he would have already used a soul skill to counter Tang Wulin, but this was a weapons battle, so that was obviously prohibited. As such, both he and Tang Wulin were forced to resort to many types of battle techniques that they wouldn't normally use. In the face of Tang Wulin's disorder-splitting wind hammer technique, there was no alternative for him but to evade for now. Boom. Another resounding boom rang out as the giant hammer slammed onto the ground to create another massive crater. Compared to the previous one, this crater was even more gigantic, and cracks were spreading from it in all directions. The entire sports stadium trembled as if it were on the verge of collapse, and many of the spectators let loose cries of alarm. Of course, Tang Wulin wasn't able to hear these voices. He borrowed the force of the second blow and swung his hammer around for a third strike. In the spectator stands, Arahang was chortling with glee. In strength, I concede only to my junior disciple brother. This is by far the best way to do battle. I have to get him to forge a pair of giant hammers for me, then learn this hammer technique for myself. Haha. It was a pity that Sima Jinkai wasn't by his side to bicker with him. Otherwise, the two of them would be even rowdier. Boom, boom, boom. Each hammer blow was more powerful than the previous one, and soon, the entire competition platform had been riddled with cracks and craters. Chu Tianj was darting all over the competition platform to evade the attacks, but the fierce winds being swept up by the hammer was already beginning to affect his movement. Was this level of strength really attainable for a human? Surely even NC wouldn't be able to replicate this. Soon, over 20 hammer blows had been dealt. Initially, only slight tremors were running through the sports stadium, but as the hammer blows continued to increase in power, the protective barrier over the competition platform was beginning to malfunction, and the entire stadium truly seemed as if it were on the verge of collapse. No, I can't let him keep going like this. There are over 100,000 people in this stadium. If he keeps this up, the entire stadium is going to collapse. With that in mind, Chu Tianj finally made the decision to retaliate. No one knew how much longer Tang Wulin could keep this up for, and it certainly wasn't a good idea to find out the answer to that question. As another hammer blow came crashing down from Tang Wulin, Chu Tianj chose not to evade. Instead, he leapt up directly toward the giant hammer before thrusting his longsword forward. Tang Wulin's hammer blows were imbued with devastating power that affected a large area, but he was using the tip of his sword to break through that power by attacking a single point. A sword projection erupted out of the tip of the sword like lightning, and Chu Tianj's body began to spin like a top as he rose diagonally up into the air. After becoming a soul sage, all soul masters gained the ability to fly. If he could rise up from the ground, then he wouldn't have to fear Tang Wulin's giant hammer any longer. He was rotating as he ascended in order to minimize the effect that the power of the giant hammer had on him, and his longsword was releasing a burst of diverting force that caused Tang Wulin's hammer to veer slightly off course. Chu Tianj was gritting his teeth tightly, and his body was clearly being blown off to the side by the fierce wind swept up by the giant hammer, but he was able to continue his ascent by violently contracting his soul core to release his soul power throughout his body. Boom. The giant hammer fell again, and dust was already beginning to rain down from the roof of the Imperial Sports Stadium. Countless spectators heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing Chu Tianj emerge out of the range of Tang Wulin's hammer blows. At the very least, they didn't have to worry about the sports stadium collapsing on them anymore. Right at this moment, the image on the big screen transitioned to a close-up shot of Tang Wulin's face. The giant hammer he was wielding was undoubtedly a double-edged sword. It was capable of unleashing extraordinary power, but had to be extremely taxing to wield as well. Now that Chu Tianj had rushed out of the range of the hammer's attacks, the match was virtually in the bag for him. The battle was all but decided. Tang Wulin had surely expended far too much energy, and his opponent had risen up into the air. In the face of Chu Tianj's signature weeping blood sword chi, he had no chance. However, the image of Tang Wulin's face on the big screen wasn't a picture of disappointment and exhaustion as everyone had expected. Instead, there was a smile on his face that seemed to be completely out of place in this current scenario. What was he smiling about? The same thought occurred to everyone at once. They were then greeted by the sight of Tang Wulin tossing his giant hammer to the side. Immediately thereafter, he turned toward Chu Tianj, who had already risen to an altitude of over 100 meters, and he raised his right hand high up into the air, upon which a beam of scintillating light suddenly erupted into the heavens. This was like a giant pillar of light that threatened to pierce through heaven and earth, and when it emerged, all other sources of light in the entire sports stadium paled into insignificance. The Holy Spirit Douluo was seated in the waiting area in the sports stadium, and tears suddenly began to flow down her face at the sight of this pillar of light. Chapter 1362. Chu Tianj swung his longsword around as he stood in midair, and his breathing had just evened out as he recovered from the impacts of the hammer blows he had been forced to endure earlier. However, he quickly discovered that the world around him seemed to have changed. The sky was falling. Of course, the sky wasn't really falling, but in this instant, he felt as if the sky were falling. All of a sudden, his body was plunged into free fall, and he plummeted straight out of the sky. Immediately thereafter, a pillar of dazzling golden light erupted up toward the falling Chu Tianj. The golden light struck him with unerring accuracy, and in the next instant, Tang Wulin had already appeared before him. At this moment, he was wielding a snowy white spear, the tip of which was pressing against the blade of Chu Tianj's longsword, which he had been forced to use as a shield against Tang Wulin's attack. Ding! The longsword was snapped, and Chu Tianj threw up a mouthful of blood. The white spear stopped just short of his throat, and Tang Wulin could easily take Chu Tianj's life if he so pleased. Everything had happened far too quickly, to the extent that the spectators had been left reeling. From the moment Tang Wulin had discarded his hammer to the instant that he defeated Chu Tianj, only several seconds had passed. All of the meticulous plans and preparations that Tang Wulin had made during the past few days came to fruition in this instant. Tang Wulin had secured victory in this fourth weapons battle of the trial of 5 gods. Tang Wulin supported Chu Tianj with one hand while holding his spear in the other as he descended onto the ground. He placed the deathly pale Chu Tianj down onto the ground beside him and gave him a nod before taking a few steps backward. The entire stadium had been stunned into silence. How could they not be stunned? Everything had happened in what seemed to be nothing more than the blink of an eye. On the rostrum, even the smile on the smiling Douluo's face had faded, and NC was sitting bolt upright as he stared intently at the white sphere in Tang Wulin's hand. The sphere had runes flashing all over its surface, and it was giving off an indescribable aura. It was only a sphere, but it was like the tallest, most insurmountable peak on the entire Douluo star. The average spectator didn't know what the sphere was, but all the powerful beings present who were at or above the titled Douluo level were certainly aware of what it was. NC murmured to himself in a slightly strained voice, "That's the divine Atlas sphere." Chu Tianj was also staring blankly at Tang Wulin, as well as at the divine sphere that he had just been defeated by. There was no disappointment or pain in his eyes, only a sense of indescribable yearning and inspiration. "Thank you," he said as he extended a slight bow toward Tang Wulin, then turned to depart. He was thanking Tang Wulin for giving him the opportunity to see the most powerful divine sphere in the world in person. There was no shame in being defeated by such a sphere. At his current power level, he wouldn't even have the right to challenge the former owner of this divine sphere, so this was an honor that he had never thought that he would get to experience. Tang Wulin slowly raised the sphere high above his head, and a sense of pride welled up in his heart. This victory wasn't for the Tang sect, it was for Shrek Academy. That's right, it was the divine Atlas sphere that had been bestowed upon him by the Atlas Douluo that had secured the victory. The Douluo Empire had the Vajra bracelet up its sleeve, but as the current Tang sect master and Sea God's Pavilion master, Tang Wulin had the unreserved support of both the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, so he certainly wouldn't be lacking in precious treasures himself. Tang Wulin had 3 divine weapons in total in the form of the Golden Dragon Sphere, Divine Atlas Sphere, and Divine Space-Time Shuttle. This was why Tang Wulin had been so confident about this weapons battle. Even if the Divine Atlas Sphere couldn't defeat his opponent, he still had more tricks up his sleeve that he could use through the Divine Space-Time Shuttle. But this was undoubtedly the best possible outcome. This was the first time that the Divine Atlas Sphere had been displayed to the world again in its full glory following the passing of the Atlas Douluo. And not just Tang Wulin, but all of Shrek's 6 monsters also had tears flowing down their faces. They had all witnessed how the Atlas Douluo had sacrificed his own life to save them. As the most powerful being in the world, even the Godslayer missile wouldn't have been able to kill him had he not been so intent on protecting the students of Shrek Academy. Dai Tianling exhaled as he sank back into his chair. He was suddenly struck by the feeling that there were some aspects of his outlook that had to change. He didn't say anything, nor did he express any anger or disappointment. He merely stood up and left the rostrum. Prior to the commencement of the Trial of 5 Gods, who could have anticipated that Tang Wulin would be able to achieve all of this? Every single match had been quite perilous for him, and he was forced to come back from behind in all of them. But the fact of the matter was that he had won. Without sufficient power to back himself up, even all of the luck in the world wouldn't have been able to earn him these victories. Even more importantly, with each victory that he secured, his momentum and popularity continued to build. For the first time, Dai Tianling's confidence in NC began to waver. Was the final battle armor master match really an assured victory for the Empire? Just how many trump cards did Tang Wulin have up his sleeve? Was NC really guaranteed to be able to secure victory against him? There were no absolutes in this world, and a wry smile appeared on Dai Tianling's face as this notion dawned upon him. The match was currently being replayed on the big screen, and it wasn't particularly exciting compared to the previous matches, but it had still most definitely been a spectacle to behold. The majority of the battle consisted of Tang Wulin smashing the competition platform into pieces, and the giant cracks and craters on the ground were a clear visual reminder of the havoc he had wreaked. The close-up image of Tang Wulin's smiling face appeared on the big screen again, and at this point, all of the spectators were already aware why he had smiled in that seemingly dire scenario. It was because he already had confidence that he was going to win the match. In reality, the attacks he had unleashed with the disorder-splitting wind hammer technique were all setting up that final comeback. Tang Wulin had devised many plans for this battle, and using these soul-refined heavy silver hammers was one of those plans. As soon as his opponent brought out that Vajra bracelet and deprived him of his golden dragon sphere, he knew that it was impossible to have a fair weapons battle where he could hone his skills. He had only one objective for unleashing his disorder-splitting wind hammer technique: to force his opponent to rise up into the air. Tang Wulin naturally wasn't powerful enough to unleash the full power of the Divine Atlas Sphere, but he was still able to make use of it to a certain extent. Otherwise, Yang Ning wouldn't have left it to him in the first place. The special effect of the Divine Atlas Sphere was flight restriction. Following the activation of this special effect, even a limit Douluo wouldn't be able to continue flying within a certain range of the sphere. There was naturally no way that Chu Tianj would have anticipated this, but Tang Wulin was prepared well in advance and immediately followed up with his path of regal domination for an instant victory. Even up until the instant that Chu Tianj was defeated, he still had no idea what had happened. On top of that, having been wielded by the Atlas Douluo for so many years, the Divine Atlas Sphere had attained an aura of invincibility. As such, using the Divine Atlas Sphere to unleash path of regal domination imbued the attack with a powerful sense of intimidation that completely crushed the opponent's spirit. Due to the fact that soul skills were prohibited, Chu Tianj was unable to make use of the power of his sword essence, so his loss was essentially sealed from the very beginning. This match had been a very frustrating one for Chu Tianj, but he was in no place to complain. After all, he was the one who had used the Vajra bracelet and gained an unfair advantage first. After making his way down from the competition platform and accepting his golden dragon sphere and giant hammer from Chu Tianj, Tang Wulin extended an apology. "My apologies. I really didn't want to have to resort to something like this to win the match." Chapter 1363. Chu Tianj shook his head in response. "I should be the one apologizing to you. His Majesty insisted that I use the Vajra bracelet, so I had no choice. If the opportunity arises in the future, I would love to face your spear techniques again. I'm honored to have been defeated by the Divine Atlas Sphere today. I always wished that I could become powerful enough to challenge the Divine Atlas Sphere one day, but after the Atlas Douluo became the undisputed most powerful soul master in the world, I knew that I would no longer get the chance to fulfill that wish. Who would have thought that I'd get to face the Divine Atlas Sphere under these circumstances? I really must thank you for this opportunity." Tang Wulin smiled in response. "You're far too kind. I would also love to face your sword techniques again should the opportunity arise. It would definitely be immensely beneficial for him to be able to spar with such an exceptional master swordsman." As was the case with both Chu Tianj and Huang Zhengyang, Tang Wulin really hoped that he could make them regular sparring partners of his. He had won another battle, which extended his streak to 4 consecutive victories. He couldn't help but wonder what Dai Tianling thought about this. The final match was going to be held the next day, and he was going to face the most powerful being in the Douluo Empire. The outcome was no longer important. He had already won more than enough glory for the Tang sect and Shrek Academy. What was most important to him now was to enjoy the process of competing. With that in mind, a faint smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face, and he was filled with anticipation toward the upcoming match. Following Chu Tianj's departure, the Holy Spirit Douluo approached Tang Wulin before giving him a gentle hug. "Thank you." Tang Wulin sighed. "I should be the one thanking you, Your Majesty. Without the Pavilion Master's sacrifice, I wouldn't even be standing here." Yali wiped away her tears as she gently shook her head. Even if he had another chance to do everything again, he would definitely still make the same choice, and I still wouldn't be able to save him. I knew that if I had called out to him, perhaps I would have been able to influence his decision, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. In Shrek Academy, the teachers can die, but the students must live on. That is the most important rule of the academy. The teachers will protect the students with their lives at all times because you are the future of Shrek Academy and the entire continent. Tears instantly welled up in Tang Wulin's eyes upon hearing this. Indeed, even in the face of the terrifying disaster brought about by the Godslayer missile, so many students from both the inner court and outer court had survived, but almost all of the teachers had perished. The Holy Spirit Douluo wasn't just speaking empty words. They were backed up by reality. Tang Wulin took a deep breath before replying in an earnest voice. "Your Majesty, we'll be sure to continue the legacy of Shrek Academy. We'll also protect all of the Academy's future students with our lives and ensure that the radiance of Shrek Academy is never snuffed out." Yali gently laid a hand on Tang Wulin's cheek. "Don't call me Your Majesty. Call me Aunt Yali. Yan Ming and I never had a child, and we saw Naira as our daughter, but she's since disappeared. In the instant that you raised the Divine Atlas Sphere and displayed its glory to the world again, I already saw you as my child." A sense of warmth suddenly welled up in Tang Wulin's heart. "No, I don't want to call you Aunt Yali. My parents are no longer around. Will you be my godmother?" Yali faltered slightly upon hearing this before tears began to flow down her face again. This wasn't because she was very emotionally brittle and fragile. It was just that she was already struggling to control her emotions after seeing the Divine Atlas Sphere, and Tang Wulin's words had tipped her over the edge again. She and Yan Ming had both been very fond of Naira, and due to the fact that she was unable to bear children, they had expressed the desire to adopt Naira as their daughter on multiple occasions. However, Naira turned them down in a euphemistic manner each time, and she and Yan Ming naturally couldn't force the issue. Not having a child had always pained Yali greatly, and she had always been racked by guilt over her inability to bear a child for Yan Ming. As such, Tang Wulin's words had truly touched the deepest part of her soul. Tang Wulin took 2 steps backward before falling to his knees before Yali, then kowtowed to her thrice in succession. "Mother." Yali's emotions instantly spilled over, and she strode forward and enveloped Tang Wuling in a tight hug as she sobbed into his shoulder. Ever since Yan Ming had passed away, she had been nothing more than a soulless husk. If it weren't for her desire to witness the revival of Shrek Academy, she would have already followed Yan Ming to the other side. She hadn't been repressing her emotions. Her heart had died with Yan Ming, so she couldn't even muster up any emotions. It wasn't that she didn't want to cry, she was simply unable to. She was still alive, but she was nothing more than a dead husk. Tang Wuling's cry of mother had dragged her back from the depths of her despair and injected hope into her life once again. So how could she control her emotions? The Holy Spirit Douluo wasn't the only one with tears streaming down her face. There was a gorgeous figure outside who was also sobbing silently into her own hand. She really wanted to call Yali mother as well, but she couldn't. Yuna was doing everything in her power to repress her sobs as she quickly rushed away. She didn't dare to remain here any longer as she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control her own emotions. The pain in her heart was no less grueling than that of Yali. Tang Wuling stood in Yali's tight embrace, and tears also began to flow down his face as he listened to Yali's emotional sobs. He could always sense that Yali had been dead on the inside, and he didn't know how to reawaken the vitality that had been suppressed within her. Just now, he had been overcome by emotions and poured out his heart, which made him very glad that he had done so. The fact that Yali was able to cry meant that her vitality and emotions had finally returned. What could be better news than that? As Yali sobbed into Tang Wuling's shoulder, her aura began to transform. The dead knot in her heart had been untied, and her emotions, soul power, and spiritual power were all fluctuating violently. A series of images began to appear around her, depicting her story with Yan Ming. There were scenes of them as a young couple walking hand in hand. There were images of them exploring the entire Douluo star, and there were images depicting them soaring over the ocean. The surrounding area suddenly dimmed, and Tang Wuling was surprised to discover that he seemed to have arrived in a holy white world. Countless clear angelic voices joined together in a holy choir around him, and he felt as if his soul were being cleansed. The images around them began to expand, and holy fluctuations surged through the air, instantly eradicating all of his exhaustion and negative emotions. The angelic voices became clearer and clearer, and the surrounding white world began to expand. Tang Wuling felt as if he was standing in the heavens while all of the life forms in the world below were looking up at them. A holy angel that was identical to Yali descended from above. The angel spread open her 8 wings and gently flapped them, sending one holy halo after another proliferating outward in all directions. In that instant, everything was cleansed and elevated, and it was a completely indescribable yet touching sensation. It was as if a shimmering golden gate that led to another world had appeared in the sky. Yali gently flapped her 8 wings, and her eyes were filled with warmth and compassion. The 8 wings folded around Tang Wuling, and amid the holy energy that had enveloped his body, Tang Wuling could hear her voice. I'll protect you for the rest of my life, my child. Brother Ming, do you see this? We have a child now. She slowly raised her right hand before gently tapping her index finger on Tang Wuling's forehead. Tang Wuling immediately felt as if his mind had erupted into a frenzy, and his enormous reserve of spiritual power was instantly cleansed. The residual effects left behind by his blood dragon transformation instantly vanished, and he felt as if his bones, meridians, dragon core, and soul core had all been cleansed. This was an extremely comfortable sensation. His soul power hadn't been enhanced, but he could clearly sense that he was somehow different from before. Unbeknownst to him, this was a divine blessing that Yali had bestowed upon him. The most important effect of the divine blessing was its ability to enhance one's aptitude and learning ability. On top of that, divine blessing also had a guardian special effect, which was essentially the equivalent of bestowing upon Tang Wuling a second life. Divine blessing was something that Yali could only use once in her life, and it could only be activated when she was in her current state. Chapter 1364. Yali had been stuck at rank 98 in soul power for several decades, but Tang Wuling's heartfelt call had allowed her to take that final step. NC had only just left the Imperial Sports Stadium when all of a sudden, he stopped and turned back toward the stadium with astonishment in his eyes. He wasn't the only one to have sensed something. Everyone who knew what to look for had also been alerted to what had just happened. In the air above the Imperial Sports Stadium, a cloud that was radiating rainbow light had appeared. The cloud had a golden lining, and all those who witnessed it were struck by an indescribable sense of comfort, as if their hearts and souls had been cleansed. In that instant, the light of the sun seemed to have dimmed slightly, and countless light elements were being absorbed by the rainbow cloud. The rich energy fluctuations emanating from the cloud was extremely comforting to everyone in the general vicinity, and countless people were looking up at this divine phenomenon with awestruck eyes. Is someone making a breakthrough to become a limit Douluo? NC immediately rose up into the air. Breakthroughs to become limit Douluo were very dangerous as they would definitely trigger an energy tide, which could easily result in a major disaster. As such, those attempting breakthroughs to the limit Douluo level would generally choose to do so in a secluded place and arrange for others to help them monitor the situation in the outside world. However, not only had this breakthrough arrived in a very abrupt manner, the person making the breakthrough had made no attempt to hide it at all. After rising up into the air, NC silently experienced the changes taking place in the energy around him, and a complex look gradually appeared on his face. Not only were these energy fluctuations not harmful in the slightest, all those who came into contact with them benefited to a certain extent. At the very least, they were capable of extending one's lifespan. Even a limit Douluo like him could experience this change, let alone the average person. This was like a blessing from the very heavens. Even NC counted himself very fortunate to have encountered such a miraculous phenomenon, but at the same time, he couldn't help but feel rather confused. This phenomenon clearly indicated that a healing system titled Douluo was making a breakthrough to become a limit Douluo, but there were no healing system soul masters of that caliber in the entire Star Luo Empire. As such, there was only one possibility. NC had only been made aware of Holy Spirit Douluo Yali's existence after she had stepped in to save Tonga the day before. Yet now, she was making a breakthrough to become a limit Douluo right in the Imperial Sports Stadium. She was a representative of Shrek Academy, and according to Hujier, she was also the widow of the Atlas Douluo. As such, it was safe to assume that this breakthrough had something to do with the emergence of the divine Atlas sphere during the recently concluded match. This meant that Shrek Academy was going to have another limit Douluo among their ranks. In addition to the 2 limit Douluo of the Tang sect, Tang Wuling now had an extremely formidable force behind him. There were no precedents of healing system limit Douluo in the history of the entire Douluo star. At the very least, there were none that NC could think of. Who would have thought that such a miracle would take place here and now? What would a healing system limit Douluo be capable of? The day before, Tonga had clearly already died, but she had revived him in what was truly a miraculous feat, and that was before she had even become a limit Douluo. NC was a limit Douluo himself, so he was well aware of just how massive a disparity there was between a limit Douluo and a rank 98 hyper Douluo. The difference was only a single rank in soul power, but the contrast was night and day. With her by Tang Wuling's side, he would most likely have a hard time dying even if he wanted to. He had to inform Bai Tianling of this right away, and reiterate the importance of improving the Empire's relationship with the Tang sect. The smiling Douluo was also witnessing this scene from a distance. He had already left, but just as the Tang sect vehicle had departed from the sports stadium, he immediately sensed that something was amiss and rushed back right away. He didn't know what changes a breakthrough from a healing system titled Douluo could bring about, either, but he could sense that this was an opportunity that he would sorely regret missing. The more powerful someone was, the greater the benefit they derived from this, and the benefit in question was very simple and direct. It resulted in an extension in their lifespan. It was truly fantastic that the Holy Spirit Douluo was making a breakthrough under these circumstances. NC was unaware of the fact that Shrek Academy still had another living limit Douluo among its ranks, but he was aware of this. Those 2 limit Douluos would undoubtedly play an instrumental role in the revival of Shrek Academy. Could it be that Tang Wuling had planned all of this in advance? Initially, Hujier had only been accepting of Tang Wuling as the new sect master, but now, he was slowly beginning to develop a sense of admiration for this young sect master. Even he hadn't realized that his attitude toward Tang Wuling had constantly been changing in subtle ways. After a long while, Tang Wuling finally awakened from that mystical state. Yali was still standing before him, but she looked as if she had been born anew. The hood on her head had been removed, and she appeared to be no more than 20 years of age. What was most astonishing to Tang Wuling was that her white hair had reverted back to its original color. There were no traces of the tears that had flowed down her face earlier, and her entire body was radiating holy light while her 8 wings of light flapped gently behind her. She was appraising Tang Wuling with a compassionate smile, and Tang Wuling reflexively called out, "Mother." Yali nodded before raising a hand to pat his head as she said in a gentle voice, "I have a son now. I haven't felt such joy ever since your godfather passed away. Thank you, Wuling. I'm truly grateful to you." Tang Wuling hurriedly said, "Don't say that, Mother. I should be the one thanking you. We've already tracked down Godfather's soul, and you've become a limit Douluo. Perhaps there'll be some further possibilities in the future." Yali nodded in response. "I certainly hope so. I thought I would never be able to take this step. Who would have thought that it'd be so easy in the end? I have to return to the submarine right away so I can go into seclusion and fortify my newfound powers. You'll have to look after yourself in the meantime." After making such a a sudden breakthrough to become a limit Douluo, she had to consolidate right away. Otherwise, there was a chance that her cultivation rank would drop back down, and there were also other hazards involved as well. Don't worry, mother. I'll be fine with Hall Master who here to help me, and there's only one match left in the trial of 5 gods anyway. Yali nodded in response. I'm not overly concerned. After all, the Douluo Empire is still an ally for us in the Tang sect. Look after yourself tomorrow. I'm sure MC won't press you too hard in the match tomorrow, but don't force yourself beyond your limits. Do you understand? Sometimes, it's better to bend than to break, and failure can teach one a valuable lesson. Tang Wuling understood that Yali was saying that she was worried that he would be overly dejected after losing the match. Rest assured, I've already mentally prepared myself for a defeat. I knew that I would win some of the matches during this trial of 5 gods, but I didn't think that I would do this well. I'm already very satisfied, and I know that I haven't brought shame to our Tang sect and Shrek Academy. For this last match, I'm just going to enjoy myself. Look after yourself as well. You've only just made a breakthrough, so take care not to rush things. I'll go and meet up with you right away once everything is taken care of here. Tang Wuling was also in a very good mood. Yali's breakthrough to become a limit Douluo was fantastic news for Shrek Academy, not to mention that she had also recovered from her extreme grief-stricken state. On top of that, as his godmother, Yali also filled the void left in his life by the departure of his foster parents. Following Yali's departure, Tang Wuling also strode out of the resting area, yet just as he was about to leave, he suddenly sensed a familiar presence. Why isn't everyone else with you? A gentle voice suddenly rang out. Chapter 1365. Tang Wuling turned to discover Douluo standing in the corner with teary eyes, and his heart stirred as he immediately rushed over to her. He looked at the lips that he had once kissed and the body that he had once held, and a sense of desire welled up in his heart. However, the notion that Naya's soul was the one currently occupying this body made him rather hesitant and reserved. You still like her more, don't you? Douluo asked with a displeased pout. Tang Wuling cleared his throat in a slightly awkward manner and dodged the question. Why are you here? Did you follow me to the Douluo continent? Douluo replied. I'm here on behalf of the Spirit Pagoda. I didn't follow you here, but I knew that you had come here. Mistress finally made a breakthrough. I'm so happy for her. Tang Wuling sighed. She still really misses you. Douluo also heaved a faint sigh. I deceived her and teacher. I no longer have the courage to meet her again, and I don't know what identity I should present to her. I heard your conversation just now. Mistress really is the kindest person in this world. I'm really glad that you asked her to become your godmother. She's always really wanted a child of her own. Tang Wuling nodded in response before answering Douluo's original question. There are too many people outside, and I would risk exposing everyone else by traveling with them, so I'm leaving on my own. Douluo said. I came to see you to advise you to take extra care and travel with everyone else if possible. Zhang Diang isn't just going to let you off the hook after you took his soul spirit, and Kaienqiu Dongfang has also taken an interest in you. After finding out that you and Douluo were once classmates, he asked me to tell him everything I know about you, so you should be very careful when you get back to the Federation. Tang Wuling's heart stirred upon hearing this. Is the Spirit Pagoda really fully colluding with the Holy Spirit cult? Douluo shook her head in response. I'm not sure. Only Kaienqiu Dongfang's most trusted subordinates know the answer to that question. However, I trust that everything you saw was real. As for the extent of their collusion and their joint objective, that's beyond me. Of course, on the surface, the Holy Spirit cult has nothing to do with the Spirit Pagoda. Over in the Federation, the Spirit Pagoda has been heavily impacted by the recent controversy. In contrast, the Tang sect is gaining a lot of support, and your performance during this trial of 5 gods is further contributing to that trend. Tang Wuling nodded before asking, do you know what the situation is like with the federal military? When are they planning to deploy their troops? I'm not sure. The Federation has made this information strictly confidential, and the entire eastern coast is currently under lockdown. I doubt even Kaienqiu Dongfang knows when the military is planning to deploy its troops. What's concerning is that this level of strict lockdown could well indicate that the Federation is already making preparations for a big move. So go back as soon as you can once you take care of things here. If a war really does happen, try not to get swept up into it. I heard from Kaienqiu Dongfang that the Federation is very determined. The lack of resources on the Douluo continent is already severely hampering the development of soul technology, so their objective is to conquer the other 2 continents at all costs. Tang Wuling nodded in response, but he knew that if a war were to actually eventuate, there was no way that he would be able to stay out of it. Douluo took one final glance at him before turning to depart. I'm going now. Tang Wuling opened his mouth to say something, but remained silent in the end. Just as Douluo was about to leave, she suddenly stopped before turning back to face Tang Wuling. If my consciousness completely fuses with Douluo someday, and she becomes the dominant consciousness, will you miss me? I don't want that. Tang Wuling immediately blurted out in response. A wide smile appeared on Douluo's face upon hearing this, and she dove into his arms before locking him in a tight embrace, pressing herself flush against his body. That's all I needed to hear, big brother. I don't know what will become of me in the end, but just know that neither Douluo nor I will ever hurt you. After her voice trailed off, Douluo gently pushed him away before vanishing amid a flash of silver light, leaving Tang Wuling to stare blankly at the spot where she had been standing just a moment ago. He had intended to ask Naya why she was unwilling to leave the Spirit Pagoda, but he didn't get a chance to do so. Naya and Douluo, what exactly was going on with them? In any case, it was definitely a good thing that she was also on the Douluo continent. The Tang sect master is on the verge of defeating an entire empire on his own. Similar headlines were being released by all major media outlets in the Douluo empire, and the hype around Tang Wuling had reached an all-time high. His name had become synonymous with the word hero in the eyes of the empire's citizens, and many people were only now realizing just how powerful the Tang sect was. This new Tang sect master was truly a freakish prodigy, but of course, in the wake of Tang Wuling's 4 consecutive victories, there was no shortage of dissenting and accusatory voices that had appeared, most of which were directed at the imperial family. Tang Wuling was only a young man in his early 20s, and he wasn't even a titled Douluo yet. Why was it that the empire was being beaten so comprehensively by him? If things were to continue in this fashion, the entire empire was going to lose to a single person, who was going to be held responsible for such a disgraceful outcome. In ancient times, the loser of the trial of 5 gods would have to pay a heavy price. Did this mean that the empire would have to pay a price to the Tang sect if it were to lose the final match as well? For many years, the empire had been nurturing outstanding talents and promoting the concept of individual heroism. How have these efforts resulted in 4 consecutive losses in this trial of 5 gods? Monster Academy was also being made to look like a downright third-rate academy. A young man in his early 20s from Shrek Academy was enough to embarrass the entire empire to such a degree. Why was there such a vast disparity between the 2 academies? All types of criticisms were being aimed at the Imperial family and Monster Academy, and this entailed that if the empire were to lose this final match, even the reputation of the Imperial family could be negatively impacted. Dai Tianling was feeling quite frustrated. He didn't think that things would turn out like this. This was supposed to be an arrangement that allowed him to kill multiple birds with one stone, but it turned out that he had shot himself in the foot instead. If he had known that Tang Wuling was this powerful, he would have implemented an age restriction and made this a contest between those of the younger generation. At the very least, the losses wouldn't be so embarrassing then. Now, he had been backed into a corner. To put it more accurately, he had backed himself into a corner. This Tang Wuling really was a troublesome brat. He had intended to teach Tang Wuling a lesson, but the roles had been reversed and Tang Wuling was teaching him a lesson instead. At the same time, this trial of 5 gods had served to forge a resounding reputation for this new Tang sect master. The empire had no choice but to send out the Holy Dragon Douluo for the final match, but there was no glory in winning such a lopsided battle. Right at this moment, a familiar voice rang out. Your Majesty. MC had the special privilege of entering and leaving the Imperial Palace as he pleased, and he was now appearing before Dai Tianling. What is it, teacher? Dai Tianling was in a foul mood, and even the sight of NC didn't change his mood in the slightest. NC replied in a serious voice, I believe it's necessary for us to reconsider some things. Not long after you left, the healing system Hyper Douluo from Shrek Academy made a breakthrough to become a limit Douluo. What? Dai Tianling abruptly rose to his feet with an astonished look on his face. He was naturally well aware of just how rare limit Douluos were, and he had always treated NC with respect precisely because he was a limit Douluo. However, 2 new limit Douluos had appeared before him in just the span of 2 days. What the hell was going on with this world? Chapter 1366. It's true, many members of the general public bore witness to her breakthrough, and I'm sure you'll receive the news soon as well. I only came here to verify that it did indeed happen. On top of that, she's the first healing system limit Douluo in history. As such, I think it's necessary that we reconsider the stance that we're taking with the Tang sect. Dai Tianling could imagine what a healing system limit Douluo entailed even without a description from NC. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that a healing system limit Douluo would be able to save anyone as long as they weren't long dead. The Tang sect and Shrek Academy were so close with one another that they were virtually a single entity. As such, he really did have a lot to consider consider now that such a powerful being had appeared among them. Dai Tianling took a deep breath as a wry smile appeared on his face. Was I too conceited, teacher? This could have easily all been avoided. If he had agreed to the Tang sex conditions from the very beginning, none of this would have ever happened. Now, the imperial family was in a very difficult position. Now's not the time for remorse and backtracking, Your Majesty. We have to look ahead and focus on the future, NC said. Do you have any good suggestions, teacher? Dai Tianling asked. NC replied, I do. Seeing things have already progressed to this point, how about? While the entire Douluo continent had its attention completely focused on the trial of 5 gods, there was a group of people gathered in a dark underground dungeon. The light here was very dim, and even people with exceptional eyesight would only be able to make out a series of blurry figures. Everyone present was wearing large black hooded cloaks that concealed their entire bodies. What are the results of Demon Sovereign's blood test, Blood Demon? An authoritative voice rang out within the dungeon. A raspy voice replied, the results are quite positive. The medicine is almost certainly working, and if we continue to administer it, we should be able to keep the situation under control. Once Demon Sovereign recovers, it won't matter even if the Atlas Douluo gets resurrected. Speaking of the Atlas Douluo, have you taken care of his soul properly? We have to return it to the Tang sect once the date of our agreement arrives. The authoritative voice asked. Rest assured, I've taken good care of it. Yang Ning was no match for us even back when he was alive. Now, his soul is naturally completely at our mercy. That's good to hear. The divine space-time shuttle is very important, so we have to ensure that we can recover it. All right, keep administering the medicine. I don't want there to be any mishaps. A pleasant female voice suddenly rang out. My lord, the attitude displayed by the Spirit Pagoda has been rather ambiguous recently, and they've terminated many of the projects that they're collaborating with us on. The Spirit Pagoda is currently under a lot of pressure, but we're not going to allow them to cut ties with us so easily. Tell Kaiyangi Dongfeng that the preparations in the Douluo Empire are complete. We're about to reap our harvest. The female voice gave an affirmative response before continuing. My lord, the new Tang sect master, Tang Wolin, has already won 4 consecutive matches in the trial of 5 gods. I've watched the footage of the matches. If he really is only in his early 20s, then he must be supremely talented. We can't allow him to continue to develop. Coincidentally, Zhang Yang has also reached out for our assistance to take care of him. Should we do it? If we leave him be, he could very well become the second Yang Ning. I'll leave it to you. Make sure to kill him, and don't give him any chance of getting away. Infernal Emperor is currently over at the Douluo Empire, right? Get him to do the job. A fleet of massive warships was slicing through the waves, creating a marvelous spectacle to behold. The most eye-catching ships among them was a trio of giant warships, and the largest of those 3 warships was the one at the very forefront. The ship was like a floating sea, and there were at least 100 of the most advanced steel planes parked on its massive deck. Even in the boundless ocean, it resembled a massive monster. Around the 3 warships were all types of different warships, of which there were over 300. A series of giant gleaming metal cannons could be seen on these battleships, and they were all ready to be fired at any moment. In the captain's cabin of the sea god airplane carrier, boundless ocean Douluo Chenzenji was sitting on the main seat, and he turned to his deputy before asking, how long until we reach the Douluo Empire's territorial waters? At our current speed, we'll definitely get there within 10 days. We've already activated all of our radar disruption equipment. With the Douluo Empire's detection capabilities, it'll be at least 7 days before they discover us. All right, Chenzenji replied in an indifferent manner. He rose to his feet before casting his gaze out the window, and he was greeted by the sight of the boundless ocean. For him, the ocean was his closest friend. In the end, he had been unable to delay the commencement of this war for very long. The voice of the Eagle faction had simply been too overbearing. Even as one of the leaders of the Eagle faction, it was impossible for him to repress everyone's voices. Yue, please don't blame me for this. This war is a necessary evil. For the sake of the Federation's future and for the future of the human race, we must seize more resources. I'll make sure to minimize the amount of slaughter that takes place, and I'll be ruthless to any Holy Spirit cult clown that dares to rear their ugly heads. On this occasion, he was accompanied by 10 of the 18 battle gods of the Battle God Hall, as well as countless powerful beings from all of the major legions and fleets. He didn't even bother to think about the Dou Spirit Empire. His main opponent was the Douluo Empire. If he could conquer the Douluo Empire, then the Dou Spirit Empire would have no alternative other than to surrender. Yue, if you had been willing to give me a chance, perhaps I wouldn't even be here. For you, I'm willing to give up the entire world, but you didn't give me another chance. In 10 days, the Douluo Empire is going to face the full wrath of our federal fleet. The dazzling sunlight of a new morning shone into Tang Wulin's room through his window. During the trial of 5 gods thus far, he had secured 4 consecutive victories, saved the limit Douluo's life, or witnessed to the emergence of a new limit Douluo, and even robbed the Spirit Pagoda's vice chairman of a soul spirit. What initially appeared to be a negative situation had since become a very favorable one, and Tang Wulin was in a very good mood. Following his return the day before, the smiling Douluo had already told him that even if he were to lose the final match, the Douluo Empire would still be willing to accept all of the Tang sex conditions, albeit at a 10% discount. This meant that Tang Wulin had essentially already completed his mission. The upcoming final match was going to be his first true battle against the limit Douluo. No matter how powerful his opponents had been in the past, they couldn't compare with the limit Douluo, particularly one who was also a 4-word battle armor master. The final match of the trial of 5 gods was going to be the battle armor battle. Are you ready, Tang Wulin? Tang Wulin asked internally, and the answer was most definitely an affirmative one. During his meditation the night before, he had completely integrated the divine blessing into his own body, and he felt like he had taken another stride toward combining all of his powers and abilities into a cohesive package. Even Tang Wulin himself wasn't sure exactly how powerful he currently was, but he was definitely constantly improving at a rapid rate. Under the effect of the divine blessing, he was approaching full mastery of the body sex congenital secret method. The congenital secret method couldn't make him invincible, but it made his path to invincibility a smoother one. Even against NC, he wasn't completely devoid of advantages. At the very least, his bloodline would be able to suppress NC's powers to a certain extent. He opened the window and took a deep breath of fresh air, then brushed his teeth before having some breakfast with his friends. Yakshu, make some preparations for the return journey. We can't continue to delay here. We have no idea what the situation in the Federation is like, so we have to get back as early as possible. After the trial of 5 gods concludes, I'll meet with the Imperial family right away to establish our deal. After that, we'll stay here for 3 more days at most before we return to the Federation. The Tang sector declared war on the Spirit Pagoda, so it was definitely under immense pressure over in the Federation. He had to get back as soon as possible to support the amorous Douluo. Furthermore, he had been completely exposed to the public, and Yali had also become a limit Douluo, so it was time to set the revival of Shrek Academy into motion. At the very least, he had to ask Yali and Elderlong just how many powerful beings would be willing to unite under the banner of Shrek Academy. At the same time, he had to track down sources of sufficiently potent life force energy to supply to the Seed of Life. Only after purifying the entire Sea God's Lake would they be able to rebuild Shrek City on its original site. Chapter 1367. There were too many things that he had to do. He had to get back to the Federation as soon as everything here was taken care of. With the weapons that the Tang sect was going to supply to the Douluo Empire, he was confident that the Federation wouldn't dare to attack the Empire without some careful consideration. All right. Long Yakshu nodded in response while appraising him with a meaningful look in her eyes. Looking at the young man before her, she couldn't help but feel as if she were in a dream. She could still remember the slightly downtrodden state that he had been in when he had first arrived at the Blood God Legion, but now, he was already close to standing at the pinnacle of this world. Jiang Wuyu gently nudged her and said in a hushed tone, isn't it painful to be looking at things that you can't have? Why don't you choose something that's readily available instead? Shut up and eat your food. All of the people present were powerful soul masters, so they had naturally heard what he had said. A deep blush immediately appeared on Long Yakshu's face, and she gave him a vicious glare while stomping firmly down onto his foot. Amused looks appeared on everyone's faces, and Tang Wulin was also feeling rather awkward. He could only play dumb and pretend that he hadn't heard anything. What are your plans after today, boss? Our battle against the Monster 8 Kings the other day was really anticlimactic. How about we arrange another sparring match after the trial of 5 gods concludes? I'm sure Long Yue will participate this time, she suggested in an eager voice. Before Tang Wulin had a chance to reply, Yue Tangyu interjected. How are you so certain that Long Yue will be willing to participate? After seeing Captain's trial of 5 gods, he probably doesn't even have the courage to challenge us anymore. Indeed, the powers that Tang Wulin had displayed during the trial of 5 gods had already reached a level far beyond those of the Monster 8 Kings. In the face of such an outrageously powerful opponent, it really was difficult to to muster up the courage to issue a challenge. Tang Wuling smiled and replied, "My plan is to cast aside all inhibitions." Everyone exchanged several glances upon hearing this, and a smile appeared on Yu Xingling's face as she said, "Sounds like a great plan. I'm really looking forward to seeing it in action." The battle armor battle was going to be the most complete battle between soul masters, and it was the best opportunity for one to showcase their powers, especially when faced with such a powerful opponent. Each additional second that he managed to last was something for him to be proud of. Besides, he had already won all of the previous 4 matches in this trial of 5 gods, and the deal between the Tang sect and the Douluo Empire was all but sealed. As such, all that was left for him to do was to cast aside all inhibitions and wholeheartedly enjoy this battle. There was no extensive meticulous planning. In the face of such a powerful opponent, his sole objective was to display his powers to their fullest extent. As long as he could do that, he was satisfied, and he was confident that this match would definitely benefit him immensely. As usual, the Imperial Sports Stadium was packed to the rafters. This was going to be the final match of the trial of 5 gods, so ticket prices had been bid up to an all-time high. Today is the battle armor match, right? Do you think Holy Dragon Douluo will be representing our empire? If he does, there's no glory to be had even if we win. There's no need to read too deep into it. We already had a limit Douluo representative in the 3rd match, didn't we? Besides, this is just a friendly match between the Tang sect and our empire. All I'm interested in is seeing a good show. It's not like this has anything to do with our conflict against the Douluo Federation. The Tang sect is on far better terms with our empire than it is with the Federation. You're right. Having said that sect master Tang really is badass. He's already won 4 consecutive matches. I asked my soul master friends for an appraisal, and they all say that his powers are at least comparable to a hyper Douluo. On top of that, he has the backing of the Tang sect, and that's why he was able to win so many matches. The Tang sect support was really apparent during the last weapons battle. Those 2 spears and that spindle-shaped thing that he used were most likely all divine weapons. I wonder if he's going to bring out those divine weapons during the battle armor match today. I didn't even get a good look at them yesterday before the battle ended. Speaking of yesterday's battle, that was a really weird match. Sect master Tang was disarmed from the get-go, but he suddenly brought out those massive hammers. How did he even manage to pick them up? Do you reckon they were hollow? Are you stupid? Did you not see how powerful those things were? I'm really worried that the sports stadium will actually collapse if he uses those hammers while wearing his battle armor. That's not going to happen. There were people sighted at the sports stadium yesterday, working through the night to fortify the building. They brought over a lot of large defensive soul tools to make sure that no mishaps arise during today's battle. That's good to hear. Safety is number 1 at all times. If the stadium collapses, we'll be in big trouble. What do you mean by that? Are you implying that you have tickets? I do. I bought tickets for all 5 matches in a package deal before the trial of 5 gods had even begun, and they were quite cheap back then, especially compared to how expensive they are now. You have tickets. You have tickets. All types of discussions were being held around the Imperial Sports Stadium, and the electric atmosphere threatened to set the air alight. The final match of the trial of 5 gods was about to commence. On the rostrum in the sports stadium, Dai Tianling had arrived far earlier than he had the day before. He sat at the very center of the rostrum, looking out at the empty stadium with a serious expression. The smiling Douluo was the only one sitting by his side, while MC was absent from his designated seat. You should relax, Your Majesty. Even I don't think our sect master has any chances in today's battle. Hu Jie said with a smile. Dai Tianling glanced at him and asked, "Oh, do you really think that?" Hu Jie chuckled. "Of course. This is NC we're talking about. After all, I'm always bickering with him, but I have to admit that he's a little more powerful than I am. It's just a pity that he's not all that bright." Dai Tianling almost rolled his eyes upon hearing this. Would it kill Hu Jie not to insult NC? NC wasn't even here, and he was still throwing around such a snide remark. Hu Jie turned toward the competition platform with a smile on his face. Following the conclusion of this match, Tang Wuling was going to return to the Federation as soon as possible. He had to admit that he was rather reluctant to see Tang Wuling go. It had become immensely enjoyable for him to witness the miracles that Tang Wuling was constantly creating. He was watching Tang Wuling grow and develop every single day while looking forward to the creation of even more miracles. This type of anticipation was something that he hadn't felt in many, many years. Even though Tang Wuling had put on a scintillating performance during this trial of 5 gods, the situation in the Federation was still quite troublesome. There were many things that he had to face following his return, particularly due to his status as the Sea God's Pavilion Master of Shrek Academy. All of these were shackles that were going to bind him, and he would have to work even harder to break these shackles. After all, this wasn't 10,000 years ago, and it certainly wasn't 20,000 years ago, where the power of a single person could change the entire world. Compared to the Federation, the Douluo Empire was still lagging behind in this area. He could only hope that Tang Wuling would be able to create another miracle, regardless of whether it was reviving Shrek Academy or reinstating the former status of the Tang sect in the Federation. Both were going to be monumental endeavors. The atmosphere both inside and outside the sports stadium was one of unbridled excitement, and the number of banners in the spectator stands had virtually doubled compared to the day before. Furthermore, there were 2 distinct sides taken by the banners. Some of them read things like "Long live the Empire," and those clearly belonged to the spectators who didn't want to see the Empire suffer a 5-loss whitewash. In contrast, the members of the opposing faction were all holding up banners supporting Tang Wuling. They were very accepting of the Tang sect and were more interested in witnessing a miracle where a single man could secure the final victory in the trial of 5 gods in this modern age. If Tang Wuling could achieve such a monumental feat, he would undoubtedly be celebrated as a hero by the entire Douluo Empire. They were looking forward to the rise of a new hero, one who would epitomize the notion of individual heroism. After all, it had been at least 10,000 years since someone had successfully completed a trial of 5 gods. This trial of 5 gods wasn't a true clash between empires, but the Douluo Empire had brought out the best that it had to offer. Many people had naturally noticed that the Holy Dragon Douluo was absent from the rostrum, and thus, Tang Wuling's opponent for today was made quite obvious. Even though he was an exceptional rising star, it was still too much to ask of him to overcome a veteran limit Douluo. As Tang Wuling emerged from the waiting area with a faint smile on his face, he felt as if everything around him were different. Chapter 1368. Prior to the commencement of the first match of the trial of 5 gods, he had been very nervous. His opponent during that match was Huang Changyang, a man whose cultivation rank wasn't particularly exceptional, but his mega piloting skills were truly incredible. That match had actually been a very perilous one for Tang Wuling. If it weren't for the fact that Huang Changyang didn't know much about him, it wouldn't have been easy for him to secure that victory. After that came the second match. Overall, Zhang Diang's soul spirits were more powerful than his, and he had been completely dominated. Zhang Diang had 2 100,000-year-old soul spirits, the most powerful plant system soul spirit in the form of the infernal lightning vine, and his bonded soul spirit, the infernal flame beast, all of which were extremely powerful. If it weren't for Tang Wuling's special status as the son of nature and the infernal lightning vine's discontent with Zhang Diang, he would have lost that match. If the Tang sect master had been defeated by the vice chairman of the Spirit Pagoda, no one would mention the age disparity between the two. It would simply have been treated as a victory for the Spirit Pagoda over the Tang sect. That match had been an extremely high-pressure affair. Following those 2 consecutive victories, the pressure on him was lessened slightly, but his opponents only became even more powerful. Never did Tang Wuling think that he would face a limit Douluo for the 3rd match. If it weren't for the extraordinary circumstances that Tongyu had been facing, he would have lost that battle as well. Even though he had secured the victory in the end, that had been an extremely grueling battle. Tongyu's 5-elemental divine arrow had threatened his life on several occasions, and even though Tongyu's powers had been limited to the hyper Douluo level at the time, a limit Douluo with handicapped powers was naturally incomparable to an actual hyper Douluo. In the end, Tongyu had exhausted his power from manifesting that killing bead, and only then was Tang Wuling able to earn a victory by the thinnest of margins. If Tongyu had been able to continue to battle even in his handicapped state, the outcome of that match would have swung in either direction. That hard-fought victory had been a huge relief for Tang Wuling, and after saving Tongyu's life, he had been in a very good mood. This was the first time that he had experienced such joy ever since he had come here. The 4th match pitted him against the weapons master, weeping blood Douluo Chu Tianj. In reality, if Chu Tianj hadn't used that Vajra bracelet, Tang Wuling was prepared to engage him in a fair battle with his golden dragon spear to hone his spear techniques. Unfortunately, the Emperor had decided to play a trick on him and forced Chu Tianj to use the Vajra bracelet to strip him of his golden dragon spear. As such, he was forced to resort to his backup plan, using his giant hammers to force Chu Tianj into the air before defeating him with the divine Atlas spear. What was even more worthy of celebration was that the Holy Spirit Douluo had made a breakthrough to become the first healing system limit Douluo Douluo in history after he asked her to become his godmother. This was definitely an unexpected surprise, and a massively pleasant one. At that, thus far, he had secured 4 consecutive victories, saved Tonggu, indirectly helped the Holy Spirit Douluo become a limit Douluo, and convinced the Star Luo Empire to agree to the Tang sex conditions. Now, there was no longer any pressure on him, thereby allowing him to cast aside all inhibitions and enjoy this match. It was the same venue and the same trial of 5 gods, but his mental state was completely different as he strode into the sports stadium. It was as if the entire world had become more vibrant, and everything was so wonderful and exuberant. He cast his gaze toward the booth of the sports stadiums. He couldn't see into the booths, but through her reverse veil, which was hanging around his neck, he could sense her approximate location. A series of complex emotions welled up in Tang Wulin's heart at the thought of her. Did he really not have any feelings for Naya? Of course he did. However, Gu Yue's position in his heart was completely irreplaceable. He didn't even know whether he should be looking forward to Gu Yue's awakening, or to be content with Naya continuing to control Gu Yue's body. He had almost completely lost Naya in the past. If Naya and Gu Yue would have fused as one, would she still be her? Would Naya still be Naya? Would Gu Yue still be Gu Yue? Only when thinking about them did a hint of internal turmoil arise in Tang Wulin's heart. He shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought before casting his gaze toward the opposite side of the stadium. The Holy Dragon Douluo had entered the venue almost at the exact same moment as him, and he was currently in a set of casual clothes. It was impossible to tell what he was feeling from his expression. At the limit Douluo level, one could disguise their emotional fluctuations to a great extent. Tang Wulin gave NC a nod of acknowledgement as a gesture of respect, and a faint smile appeared on NC's face. His heart was filled with complex emotions at the sight of the young man standing before him. Several years ago, this young man had almost been killed by his disciple. Yet now, they were standing on the same platform as equals. The rate of Tang Wulin's development had truly been extraordinary, and NC had no idea how far he would go in the future. However, what he did know was that as long as Tang Wulin could continue to develop at this rate, he would definitely be able to reach his level or even surpass him someday. The final match of the Trial of 5 Gods is going to be held today, and the representative for our empire will be the most powerful soul master in our empire, the principal of Monster Academy, the master of the Imperial Holy Hall, Holy Dragon Douluo NC. I'm sure this is going to be the most spectacular match yet, so let's all enjoy it together. This will be the final match of this friendly trial, and I've received permission from His Majesty to cheer on Sect Master Tang on behalf of the empire. We hope to see you create another miracle. Cheering on Tang Wulin on behalf of the empire? All of the spectators were quite surprised to hear this, but their expressions began to ease after the announcer reiterated that this was just a friendly match. Indeed, all that should be focusing on was enjoying the match rather than overthinking things. This was going to be the ultimate showdown, and even though no one was of the opinion that Tang Wulin could actually defeat NC, this was still going to be the crowning jewel of this Trial of 5 Gods. Tang Wulin had already proven that he had the right to challenge the Holy Dragon Douluo through the 4 consecutive victories that he had secured thus far. NC had been appraising Tang Wulin this entire time, and he was surprised to discover that there seemed to be something different about Tang Wulin. Compared to the calmness that he had displayed during the previous few matches, he seemed to be much more excited and exuberant. This wasn't just the confidence one derived from sustained success. Back in his youth, he had also been just as fearless and courageous, and it was quite remarkable that Tang Wulin had managed to retain these traits despite his current status, particularly when he was facing such a powerful opponent in front of such a massive audience. Even NC was beginning to look forward to this match. Being able to battle such an exceptional young talent would undoubtedly benefit him greatly as well, and it had been a long time since he had felt these emotions. He was looking forward to an even more outstanding performance from Tang Wulin. All of the lights were focused on the competition platform, and all of the spectators were looking at the 2 competitors in an intent, unblinking manner, awaiting the commencement of the match with bated breath. Begin. The final match of the Trial of 5 Gods finally commenced. As soon as the starting signal was given, Tang Wulin immediately raised his head and cast his gaze toward NC. It was as if 2 bolts of lightning had erupted out of his eyes, and his powerful aura radiated forth alongside scorching blood essence fluctuations. The projection of a giant golden dragon appeared behind him, and it was as if there were an actual dragon dancing behind Tang Wulin. The massive golden dragon had a wingspan of over 100 meters and gave off a peerlessly domineering aura. Tang Wulin sprang forth toward NC, and it was as if his blood essence had been set alight. Tang Wulin was well aware of his advantages and disadvantages against NC, and he knew that his 2 main disadvantages lay in his cultivation rank and his battle armor. He was facing a 4-word battle armor master, of which there were perhaps less than 10 on the entire Douluo star. However, he did have some advantages, the most prominent of which was his bloodline. NC was superior to Tang Wulin in all aspects except for blood essence. Tang Wulin was only in his early 20s, so his blood essence was at its peak. In contrast, NC was well over 100 years of age. He may have been a limit Douluo, but as long as he hadn't broken through beyond the restrictions of this world, his blood essence would invariably decline. At the same time, Tang Wulin's Golden Dragon King bloodline was the bane of all dragon-type martial souls, so that would be an important factor as well. Chapter 1369. Even though there was a massive cultivation rank disparity, Tang Wulin's Golden Dragon King bloodline was still definitely going to suppress NC's Holy Radiant Dragon martial soul to a certain extent. Tang Wulin had already broken 12 of his Golden Dragon King seals, resulting in an extremely powerful Golden Dragon King aura. As such, there was no doubt that his bloodline would affect NC quite severely during their clashes. As such, Tang Wulin released his aura to its maximal extent from the get-go, hoping to negatively impact NC's performance with his bloodline power. This was a lopsided battle that was weighed heavily against his favor, so he had to maximize the few advantages that he had. A burst of bright light flashed as Tang Wulin brought his arms together in front of his own chest, and the air around him warped slightly as he hurtled directly toward NC. His powerful blood essence fluctuations made him resemble a giant dragon, and the momentum that he was building up had raised his aura to its absolute peak. When facing an opponent more powerful than oneself, the worst thing one could do was to allow their opponent to gain the initiative right away. This often resulted in one-sided battles where the weaker side was dominated for the entire battle until they were defeated. In order to avoid such a miserable outcome, Tang Wulin was releasing his aura with all his might regardless of the energy expenditure incurred by doing so. In the face of Tang Wulin's scorching aura, NC's murky eyes immediately lit up, and a clear dragon's roar rang out from his body as a giant white dragon with golden light shimmering around it rose up into the air. The powerful aura of light being released by the dragon seemed to illuminate the entire world. The aura that Tang Wulin was releasing was very spectacular and overbearing, but it still seemed to be somewhat hollow and illusionary. In contrast, the white dragon that had risen up from NC's body seemed to be completely substantial, as if it were his martial soul true body. The Holy Radiant Dragon was somewhat affected by Tang Wulin's Golden Dragon King aura, but from the looks of it, it wasn't affected all that heavily. It spread its wings and let loose one thunderous roar after another, managing to match Tang Wulin's aura even while remaining on the spot. Thus, the disparity between the powers of the 2 combatants was immediately made very apparent. Tang Wulin had already anticipated this, so he wasn't surprised at all, and it was also at this moment that he unleashed the first attack. As he was charging toward NC like a speeding arrow, his Golden Dragon King aura surged toward NC like a ferocious tidal wave. Tang Wulin's entire body instantly took on a golden color, and shimmering golden scales appeared all over his skin. He didn't unleash his martial soul true body right away, but in that instant, his essence, energy, and spirit had all been raised to their very peaks. It was as if his body had transformed into a golden cannonball, and he instantly reached NC before unleashing a devastating punch. Countless spectating soul masters drew a sharp breath in unison at the sight of this punch, and they couldn't help but marvel at Tang Wulin's speed and explosive strength. Even the average tidal Douluo couldn't utilize their aura and blood essence to such an extent. Of course, ordinary tidal Douluos were unable to accomplish this as their spiritual power didn't allow them to accomplish this level of coordination. However, Tang Wulin had been able to perfectly integrate his own power and blood essence into one, and even he was struck by a sense of exhilaration as he unleashed this punch. NC remained completely still on the spot, and his expression also remained unchanged. All he did was raise his right hand. Boom. Tang Wulin's right fist struck NC's right hand in what seemed to be a sequence that had been choreographed countless times in advance. A resounding boom rang out, and both sides came to a complete standstill for an instant. One could clearly see the exact spot where the fist and palm were connected, and a devastating shockwave that was visible even to the naked eye proliferated outward in a frenzy. The air over the entire competition platform warped slightly, and the fearsome shockwave crashed into the protective barrier, causing it to flicker and waver erratically. So badass. So handsome, the eyes of countless female spectators were practically glowing. Almost no woman was immune to the sight of such a direct and manly clash. Upon striking NC's palm with his fist, the first feeling that Tang Wuling was struck by was that he had punched an immovable mountain. The violent clash led to a brief impasse, following which Tang Wuling swiveled around like lightning, sweeping his right leg through the air to unleash his golden dragon whips its tail. He didn't even bother to release his energy against NC, as there was no way that would amount to anything. As such, he was completely containing his power within his own body and relying on his immensely powerful physical constitution to unleash a ferocious assault. He was confident that NC would be too conceited to dodge his attacks, and that would give him an opportunity. As expected, instead of taking evasive measures, he merely moved his right hand to the side to block Tang Wuling's oncoming attack. Another burst of powerful sound waves swept forth, and many of the spectators couldn't help but clamp their hands over their ears. Just how much power was required to produce such a violent clash? It most likely wasn't inferior to the power unleashed by the giant hammers that Tang Wuling had been wielding the day before. Tang Wuling continued to unleash one attack after another, and the golden light around him glowed brighter and brighter. His limbs were his most powerful weapons, and with every clash, a burst of powerful shockwaves would erupt around himself and NC. Meanwhile, NC's hands were like a pair of impregnable shields, firmly blocking all of Tang Wuling's attacks no matter how ferocious they were. It didn't look as if he were having any trouble at all, and if it weren't for the explosive shockwaves sending ripples running over the protective barrier, one could easily severely underestimate the ferocity of the clashes. Neither of them were unleashing any soul skills. They were merely clashing over and over again in the simplest and most direct manner imaginable. Only the truly powerful beings among the spectators could tell that this type of clash was the most perilous and fearsome. If NC failed to ward off even a single one of Tang Wuling's attacks, then he would risk being reduced to dust. However, that clearly wasn't going to happen. NC continued to stand before Tang Wuling like an insurmountable mountain, remaining completely still on the spot no matter what attack Tang Wuling threw at him. From Tang Wuling's perspective, it seemed that NC could keep this up forever, and he didn't seem to have been affected by Tang Wuling's Golden Dragon King bloodline either. Unbeknownst to Tang Wuling, from a pure bloodline perspective alone, Long Yue's Mountain Dragon King bloodline was superior to that of NC's Holy Radiant Dragon. As such, through his regular interaction with Long Yue, he had become far more acclimated to superior dragon bloodlines than the vast majority of dragon-type soul masters. Tang Wuling's Golden Dragon King bloodline was far more powerful than Long Yue's Mountain Dragon King bloodline, but NC was already prepared for this, and there was a vast disparity in their cultivation ranks, so Tang Wuling was unable to gain the upper hand in this area for now. 28 clashes took place in quick succession, and even with Tang Wuling's physical constitution, he couldn't help but falter a little. If a normal person had been in his place, their body would have given out long ago in the face of such ferocious clashes. During this split-second pause, NC finally seized the initiative for the very first time. He merely raised his right hand and pointed a finger toward Tang Wuling in a completely harmless-looking gesture. However, in the face of that nonchalant gesture, Tang Wuling was struck by the same feeling he had experienced when he had witnessed old Tang unleash fury of the masses for the very first time. There was nowhere for him to evade or hide, and the surrounding space seemed to be collapsing in toward him from all sides. Chapter 1370. A terrifying aura erupted toward him, but he couldn't sense any energy fluctuations from that finger. Tang Wuling took a deep breath as he took a half step backward with his right foot. He lowered his center of gravity slightly, then launched his fist against NC's finger in a solemn manner. Boom. Tang Wuling felt as if he had been struck by a soul train traveling at full speed. His body was sent flying like a cannonball, and it was completely outside of his control. From the perspective of the spectators, Tang Wuling had been sent flying as a rapid streak of golden light by what seemed to be a nonchalant finger from NC. He then crashed heavily into the protective barrier in the distance before falling onto the ground. Was this the power of a limit Douluo? The entire stadium fell completely silent. In particular, the spectators who were cheering for Tang Wuling were staring at the scenes unfolding before their eyes with their mouths gaped wide open. Everyone had heard of limit Douluo, but the vast majority of people had no idea just how powerful a limit Douluo was. In this instant, NC was displaying to everyone what true power was through his actions. Many of the spectators were left reeling by this sudden turn of events. Tang Wuling had secured 4 consecutive victories, yet he was still being made to look so powerless in the face of the holy dragon Douluo. He had unleashed such a fierce barrage of attacks to no avail, yet NC had only unleashed a single nonchalant attack, and that was enough to send him flying. They were on completely different levels. Was this the disparity between the two? Tang Wuling's blood essence was churning within his body as he fell onto the ground, but in the next instant, he immediately sprang to his feet before turning to appraise NC through narrowed eyes. A hint of surprise appeared on NC's face. What the spectators saw, felt, and imagined was always different from reality. That finger strike from NC seemed to have been very simple, but it was actually imbued with power that NC had borrowed from all of Tang Wuling's 28 successive attacks, and that power had been intermingled with his own soul power. However, in the instant that Tang Wuling was sent flying, it felt to NC as if he had transformed into a ball, nullifying much of the impact of the clash before hurtling back through the air. It seemed that Tang Wuling had been dealt an extremely heavy blow, but NC knew that he hadn't actually managed to deal Tang Wuling any substantial damage. It was quite clear that Tang Wuling was well prepared for this battle. Tang Wuling threw his head back and let loose a dragon's roar as his eyes became particularly bright. Specks of golden light began to appear at all of his joints, and he raised his right hand high above his head before making a grabbing motion, as if he were trying to tear down the heavens. A clear and domineering voice then rang out across the entire venue. Dragon, moon, song. In that instant, it was as if the specks of golden light that had appeared over his body had become miniature scintillating suns. The air inside the sports stadium began to warp slightly, and the golden dragon projection appeared behind Tang Wuling once again. However, on this occasion, there seemed to also be countless specks of light all over the giant golden dragon's body as well. How had his battle armor been manifested on that projection? Wasn't that something that could only be achieved with suits of 4-word battle armor? Could it be that he was already a 4-word battle armor master? But that was impossible. No matter how powerful Tang Wuling's physical constitution was, there was no way for him to fuse with a suit of 4-word battle armor before he became a titled Douluo. NC's heart was filled with astonishment, and he didn't take advantage of this opportunity to attack Tang Wuling. All of a sudden, he realized how foolish he had been. Tang Wuling had already declared the name of his suit of battle armor to be Dragon Moon Song, thereby confirming it to be a suit of 3-word battle armor. Yuna's body shuddered slightly upon hearing this name as she sat in the spirit pagoda booth, and a hint of pride flashed through her eyes. Tang Wuling's suit of battle armor contained her name, just as her suit of battle armor had been named Dragon Dance Kilin. He now had the right to refer to himself as Dragon Moon Song Tang Wuling. As the specks of light on the giant golden dragon's body brightened, it became clearer and more substantial, and pieces of battle armor began to emerge over Tang Wuling's body. The glittering and translucent golden battle armor resembled an artistic masterpiece carved out of golden crystal, presenting a spectacular sight to behold. The golden visor concealed Tang Wuling's handsome features. The helmet was covered in golden patterns that extended downward, and each piece of battle armor was filled with layers and textures. The pauldrons on his shoulders resembled golden dragon heads, and the breastplate didn't appear to be very heavy. On top of that, there was an emblem that seemed to have been carved out of a giant golden gem at the center of the breastplate, and every single piece of battle armor was covered in dragon patterns. This was his full suit of 3-word battle armor. Dazzling golden light flashed, and by the time the entire suit of battle armor appeared, Tang Wuling had already grown to 3 meters tall. His eyes became even brighter. All of the spectators who had just lost confidence in him were instantly revitalized. What a spectacular suit of battle armor! Setting aside how powerful it was for now, just its appearance alone was an incredible sight to behold. If a collector's replica of this suit of battle armor could be created, there would most likely be countless prospective buyers. In response to this, the giant white dragon reappeared behind NC, and specks of light also appeared over its body, but the same didn't happen to NC himself. This was true battle armor projection, the sign of a suit of 4-word battle armor. The holy radiant dragon let loose a loud dragon's roar, and its body suddenly disintegrated before it surged toward NC as streaks of dazzling white light. My battle armor is called Peerless Holy Radiant Dragon. Peerless Holy Radiant Dragon NC. It was clear that the peerless in the name wasn't an adjective to highlight the power of the holy radiant dragon. Instead, it had to have some kind of special meaning to him. It was quite possible that this was the name of his lover. A suit of white battle armor quickly encapsulated NC's entire body, and after he donned the suit of battle armor, it became completely impossible to tell that he was an old man who was close to 200 years of age, and his aura also instantly transformed. A gigantic white halo encompassed virtually the entire sports stadium, and countless dragons were dancing within the halo. A rich aura of light rose up in what was virtually a substantial wave, and the entire venue was transformed into a sea of light. The giant white dragons within the halo slowly ascended, and everything seemed to be so realistic. Battle armor projection and domain actualization. materialization. Both of these were signature traits of a suit of 4-word battle armor. Suits of 3-word battle armor enhanced a soul master by bestowing upon them the power of a domain, while suits of 4-word battle armor triggered an evolution in its wearer. 4-word battle armor was also known as demigod armor, and it was truly something that transcended beyond this world. A suit of 4-word battle armor was the most important constituent component of its wearer's life. It was like the wearer's most important organ. Following the creation of a suit of 4-word battle armor, the 4-word battle armor master had to expend a third of their own blood to awaken the suit of battle armor and truly bestow upon it life. The creation of every suit of 4-word battle armor was a tribulation of life and death for its corresponding 4-word battle armor master. If they could transcend the tribulation, then they would ascend to become part of one of the most exclusive groups on this planet. In contrast, failure could quite possibly result in death. This was why 4-word battle armor masters were so exceedingly rare. Furthermore, the power of suits of 4-word battle armor could only be compared with Godslayer missiles. To put it in simpler terms, both Douluo and NC will limit Douluo, but if they were to face one another in battle with NC using his suit of 4-word battle armor, Douluo wouldn't even be able to last a minute. In the world of battle armor masters, suits of 4-word battle armor were known as bridges to the divine realm. Why was it that all of the limit Douluo of the Holy Spirit cult, Tang sect, Shrek Academy, and Spirit Pagoda were yearning for ascension far more so than the soul masters of ancient times? This was precisely because ever since the invention of suits of 4-word battle armor, they were able to sense just how powerful that world was through their limit Douluo powers and suits of 4-word battle armor. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.